Hi guys, so we're just going to be taking a look at GBPCAD. We're going to do a top-down analysis and breakdown, and then we're going to decide what some of our biases for the week might be. Okay, so we're going to start off on the weekly time frame. For this coming week, this line represents the beginning of the new week. So it helps to build your higher time frame narrative from the lower time frame. At the same time, you're looking at the higher time frame in and of itself, and then you can tie the two things together. Anything to give you clear picture of what the narrative is, where the market is at, and where it's likely to move to next. So that being said, on the weekly time frame, right? What do we know? Right? Let's take a look at what we know, and then maybe we could move on to what we don't know. All right. So if we take a look at this, we'll see that uh, price essentially broke structure at this point on the weekly time frame, and we left behind a bit of an inducement, right? So these lows here, these relatively equal lows, was liquidity left behind, right? You could also look at it as inducement. So there are buyers who got into this trade at this point, whose sell stops, right, essentially became liquidity when price came back for this liquidity grab. And this one as well, you can as well take a look at this one. What it does look like, if you look at it more holistically, I guess, is accumulation, right? So we had a bit of an accumulation, price manipulated, right? Back into this order block, okay? And then expansion continued to the upside. Okay, so we know that price tapped into this order block, okay? After we had taken liquidity. We can just refine this down to this area. So when price began to expand to the upside, right? We went immediately for these relatively equal highs here. So while it was technically at this point a market structure shift, which saw us expand all the way to the upside until we took this liquidity. So right after taking the liquidity, the buy side liquidity resting above these equal highs, right? We left this huge rejection wick here. Now, what this tells us is that just looking at it, we have taken liquidity here. We've left a wick behind. There's a likelihood, depending on what the lower time frame tells us, that we might end up selling for a bit, perhaps into this fair value gap, okay? And then continuing our expansion to the upside. So just looking at the weekly time frame, it looks as though it's primed for a potential retracement. However, seeing as we only just took this high, or these highs rather, it might be a short-lived retracement in order for expansion to continue to the upside and then give us a proper candle close above, a proper break of structure. So let's just mark out this fair value gap. So we have a fair value gap and our other block. Okay. So on the daily time frame, just adjust this. On the daily time frame, right? Uh, we can see that after price swept these relatively equal highs, saw this massive sell candle, right, to the downside. Now, it's a bit early to tell looking at the lower time frame because we haven't had a structure shift yet. Okay. So a structure shift that will probably leave a fair value gap behind is a very huge indication that price might want to go a bit lower, retrace a bit into our weekly range before continuing the expansion, right? But as it stands, the structure on the daily time frame is still bullish. There has not been a market structure shift, not to speak of a structure break. Okay. So there's a potential for there to be a market structure shift. However, what we do have is this other block right here, right? That price has tapped into. We will see a much clearer picture on the 4-hour time frame. So on the 4-hour time frame, we can just refine this down to this other block. I actually took a buy here. Okay. See if we can find this. Right. So I took a buy here on Friday. However, I closed somewhere at this point, I think, because it was a Friday and I wasn't open to the idea of holding my trade over the weekend. So I closed quite early, either here or somewhere here. Okay. Right. Right. So on the 4-hour, what we have is a 4-hour break of structure at this point. Now, the reason I took this trade was, remember the model we just looked at on the weekly time frame and the daily time frame as well. Price broke structure and there was this accumulation phase here where price was manufacturing liquidity, okay, before this manipulation here to the downside. But I didn't just take the trade immediately, okay? I took the trade at the point at which we took sell side liquidity, okay? So if we look at this, we're going to see these relatively equal lows. And yeah, so the thing is, these models work, okay? And they make sense. The logic behind them makes sense, but it's also really important that you figure out where on the charts you want to be taking these models seriously, right? So we see these relatively equal lows, as well as price just generating a bit of trend line liquidity here before this sweep, all right? And I actually took my entry on the 5 minute using my 5 minute trigger. So let's just mark this out as our liquidity. Okay, so based off of our higher time frame analysis, there is the very real possibility that price might get anywhere into this fair value gap. Yeah. Okay. So if we get into this fair value gap and perhaps even the other block, okay. So if we get into this fair value gap, maybe into this other block, and we start to see a shift to the downside, then there is the potential for price to break this already existing low and begin a retracement, right? The retracement that we talked about. That is a potential possibility. Okay. So that is something to watch out for. It's also one of the reasons I close my trade because I am anticipating a possible retracement, right? However, when we scale down to the lower time frame, what could happen? What could happen, right? Because we already took liquidity at this point before our massive structure shift, which left a fair value gap behind. Sorry, right? We left this fair value gap behind. I'll just change the color. Right. And so what we could potentially see if we're going to continue to trade to the upside. So before price even gets into this fair value gap here for a potential reversal, a potential market shift that we don't know yet, right? Before that happened, we could potentially see price come into this fair value gap, take liquidity, tap into this other block, and then continue, right? So when we get into this fair value gap, depending on what the market objective is at that point in time, might only serve to provide internal range liquidity for a pullback, okay, and then a continuation, okay? However, if the objective is to begin a retracement on the higher time frame, perhaps the weekly, as we've looked at, then what we might see is this fair value gap creating a structure shift, okay? Of course, we could also potentially see price tap into this fair value gap, which could provide retracement into this already bullish 1 hour structure, only to go higher, get into the other block, and then give us our reversal. Okay, so it it wouldn't serve you to tie yourself to a single bias and avoid every other market possibility. So what we are doing right now is exploring all of these market possibilities so that whichever one shows up, you know where you are at every point in time and you can navigate the narrative in order to extract profit from the market. I think this is really all I have to say for now. Um, I might make another video on this particular pair. I'm sorry I didn't have time to analyze other pairs as well. This was actually really impromptu. So let's take a look at what happens eventually. Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Bye.